family history library, and we're part of the umbrella of FamilySearch, really. So I think you nailed it, Nancy.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to share my screen here so you can see the presentation. All right. Okay, that won't be the presentation. That's something I have ready to go. And let's see. There we go. So I was asked to speak with you all on beginning your United Kingdom family history and family history research. So with that in mind, this was designed to be a beginner course and will be very basic, probably for a lot of you. But I hope you'll find something helpful out of it. I'm an accredited England genealogist, and I've been researching at the library for since '89, so 32 years-ish, coming up on 32 years, and most of that in some aspect of British research. But I'm thrilled to be with you all. When we talk about the United Kingdom, my first thought was, well, what time period are we talking about for the United Kingdom? Because it wasn't always one thing. But the first thing I hope we'll talk about, we'll know what the United Kingdom is depending on the time period that we can. The next thing I wanted to do before we get too hardcore into records was to just talk about some basic research principles that I feel like come up regularly with people that I'm helping and are critical in any kind of research, but also in UK research. And then we will discuss, we'll go through the basics of searching what I call the 3 C's. The primary record sets is what those are, and you'll hear about them in a moment. And then the big 3 primary online resources for accessing those records. So I hope that by the time we're done with this evening that you would be familiar with these things. And then lastly, I've thrown in a section on some help resources as well. After this is over, you'll have some ideas of where you can go if you have more questions and that kind of thing. First of all, what is the United Kingdom? Well, I mean, generally speaking, England has been the big country, if you will, in what we geographically would call the British Isles, which would be the island of Great Britain, the big one, and the island of Ireland. Since 1707, the Acts of Union of 1707, Scotland was officially part of the United Kingdom. Wales was already really involved since Edward I conquered or invaded and conquered Wales back in the late 1200s. It was made official during the time of Henry VIII. It wasn't really necessarily considered the United Kingdom at the time, though. So when Scotland is brought in 1707, then it's the United Kingdom. At the same time, Ireland was controlled from the time of Henry VIII, basically speaking, although how do you control the Irish? So I don't want to overstate that. But it was made official when the Irish Parliament was abolished in 1800 with another Acts of Union, as it was referred to, and it stayed that way as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, Great Britain again being the big island, until 1921-22, when the Anglo-Irish Treaty separated Ireland into 2 countries, the Republic of Ireland and then Northern Ireland, at which point the United Kingdom became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that's what it's been since. Now, I suspect that a number of you would have interest in Irish research as well, and so for purposes of this this course, I wanted to put Ireland in, and so we're going to consider sort of the 1801 to 1922 or 21 version of what the United Kingdom was of Great Britain and Ireland. So,
hey Dan,
yes.
Can I interrupt real quick? Do you have a handout for this class?
Oh, I do. And Nancy, maybe if we put it in the chat, Nancy can keep an eye out. So it should have been emailed to those who
I did
registered,
email
I
it right
hope.
before. Yeah, I did email it right before the.
But it would have been, I
Probably
sent it to them just this afternoon. And so, yeah, so they would have just, so Nancy and the library people would have probably barely sent it, but you should have that. So, and just so you know, I did my handout and then I did the PowerPoint based on the handout. And so I know it's important to a number of you to be able to follow along and have the handout follow the presentation. And so it should follow it extremely closely. All right, so I want to talk about some basic research principles first before we get into the records, because I think it's important to be thinking like a researcher. The first principle that I consider is is evidence gathering. I think for some people like to look for this record that's going to tell them what they want to know specifically. Rarely does one record answer your questions regarding an ancestor. I like to think of, since I like to watch some of these crime investigation shows, I like to think of genealogical research as something like a criminal investigation, especially Irish research, because of some of the records lost there. And really what we're doing when we're researching is we're gathering evidence, which is in the form of records. Many times records will have issues that throw us off just a little bit. In the process, we need to consider negative evidence, the lack of someone perhaps out there to provide an alibi. We need to analyze this evidence so that we can reach a sound genealogical conclusion. So we're looking at what this evidence says, and then based on all of this evidence, can we, in effect, convict someone, if you will, of being your ancestor? That's what we are, that's really what we're about. I think sometimes it's easy to bounce all over the place in the investigation and struggle to get to that point. So that brings us to the next one. There's an old genealogical adage that is known to the unknown. You need to work from the known to the unknown. This means that you start with what you know about an ancestor. Now I realize sometimes it's hard to know what you know about an ancestor, but the records should be guiding you that way. One of the, and then these records should lead you to the next ancestor and the next records to search. You know, there are a lot of family traditions, especially that tend to be partially true, but you don't always know where that truth is. And so you could have a family tradition that, well, your last name's Nelson, so you, the tradition could come down that you're a descendant or you're related to Admiral Horatio Nelson, right? Battle of Waterloo, which would be great and all, except, right, he only had one child, an illegitimate daughter named Horatia. So it would be really poor research to pick somebody that you believe you're related to and then to try and work descendancy and come forward in time. You should always work known to the unknown based on the facts that you're learning about your ancestor, and let that guide the direction of your search. I mean, I have a family tradition in my own family. My great-grandmother's third husband, she had four. First one was supposedly killed by a tornado, although I found evidence of a possible divorce. The second one, certainly there was a divorce because he was abusive. The third one, according to my grandmother, and I got into this because of my grandmother. She was an orphan herself, but she loved family history. But she told me about her mother's third husband who was shot and killed. This was down in Alabama. It was dusk. He was cutting across a neighbor's property. There were bushes and hard to see, and the neighbor accidentally shot and killed him, thinking he was a wild animal. And when I saw the newspaper article referring to the shooting, actually he had gone to this home, had insulted a man's wife, and the husband, she went and got her husband, who came and found husband number 3 walking along the side of the road and shot and killed him and left him for dead. Yeah, thank you. I'm seeing one of you sort of grimace, and I'm used to telling the story, Mary. So the um, the thing is, there was some truth to the story, right? But not exactly what we thought. And I find lots of times that people will rely just heavily on a tradition. Well, but Grandma said this, and that we're descended from an Indian princess. That's a kind of a common one out there. Um, when in reality, Grandma wouldn't have known the Indian princess. It would be another 4 or 5 generations back or something. So you couldn't have direct knowledge. And it probably comes from Grandma at one point saying, boy, my grandma had high cheekbones and she had this dark complexion. I wonder if she was descended from an Indian princess. And next thing you know, there are 1,000 people who believe they're all descendants of an Indian princess. I think this kind of thing happens. So you need to be open-minded. The other thing I like to say is don't borrow trouble. Um, Oftentimes, when you're working on a difficult research problem, it might seem like there's an easy answer 40 miles away or further away when there's been nothing in the process of your evidence gathering to lead you that direction. Or it's also possible, especially with these online searches, you do a search for some particular name and you get 1,000 hits and you're trying to figure out, wow, how do I deal with all of this? And so you start reaching away from what you know about your ancestor. And I like to think of that as borrowing trouble. Stay focused in the location, the time period, and the records in which you would expect your ancestor to be, and don't reach outside of that until you've exhausted research in the area in which you know your ancestor was. And the other piece to this that I see, especially with Irish research, where church records begin on average about 1820, the temptation is you've researched back in the parish register as far as the registers go. And your family could still have lived in the area for a previous 100 years, but there are no records that document that family, or if they exist, their estate records or something that are difficult to find. But 10 miles away, you find someone with the same name around the same time period, and you think, oh, since I can't find my person, this must be my person over here, because you're ignoring what you don't know, what you can't know necessarily because of the records. And that's related to borrowing trouble. Just because a record doesn't exist doesn't mean your ancestor is existing in another record somewhere else, and it's just not actually him, if that makes sense. Okay, the next one. Never trust spellings or indexes. And I can't stress this enough. If your name was Poffenberger, it would be obvious, right? I mean, my daughter was sitting at school in high school one time, and she's sitting with her friends, and she passed around a napkin and said, hey, I want you all to write down how you know my last name. How do you spell my last name? And she came back with 3 different spellings. Like, I mean, again, remember that 99% of the time, your ancestor is not writing their name in a record, nor could they even necessarily write, nor were they necessarily standing over somebody saying, no, we spell our surname Clark with an E, or Smith with a Y, right? Or Allen with an A, right? They weren't doing that. So don't ever, ever, ever be stuck on how my name was spelled. If you are, then you flunked this course this evening. As kind of a joke, I'm saying. All right. Okay. I can't stress that enough. And indexes as well. And I'll show you some fun examples of why that's true. But it's important to think about the process for bringing a record from its original to being searchable online, right? So some of these slides are a little smaller, but I figure you're on your screen. So forgive me for some of the font being smaller than I would use to project. But I'm taking advantage of the fact that you're all on screen, so hopefully you can see them. But right, an original record, you have a person or a clerk, as we say, who's writing down information in a record, and they might hear it a particular way. They might have a unique writing style. You don't know necessarily what they're dealing with. I mean, my favorite example is Martin Luther King. In the 1930 census is listed as Marvin. He's Marvin L. King. It's clearly him, right? I mean, nobody knew what he would end up becoming as far as how famous, but having said that, they still got his name wrong. And so if you were looking for Martin, until it got corrected in the index, you could have a hard time finding them. And I don't know why the numbering is suddenly kind of weird, but you have an indexer then that goes through the record and who's looking at this original record, and they're going to write it down. In the old days, and later on they started doing word processing and typing, right? But how well can they read the record? When you go through an original record, you're looking for certain surnames, so you have this idea of what that's going to look like. They don't have any preconceptions. They're trying to figure out what it says. Maybe the record's in really bad shape and hard to read. They could make typos, something as simple as a typo. And again, there aren't spelling consistencies, so you need to be aware of that. If they're writing this down, then you have another person who has to interpret that person's writing as they enter it into a computer. And so you have another opportunity for problems. Okay. Then you have this computer database with lots of names and dates and places, all of which are open to interpretation in reality. And I'll show you a couple examples there. And my concern in mentioning all these possibilities is you think you'll never find anything again, but there are ways to work with it, but don't be so rigid in your thinking that you miss things. And also know that these databases, then they're relying on these computer programmers to write algorithms, and which are, formulas for deciding, here's what was put into the search boxes. What does this mean? And how am I going to pull up information based on that? I remember sitting at the desk in the library, and this woman coming over frustrated that she could not find her family in the 1891 census in Wales. And so I said, well, why don't you have a seat and let me take a shot at it. And I started to type in one of the given names of the children who would have been a child in 1891. And she said, no, the Welsh don't spell it that way. The Welsh spell it this other way. And I kind of smiled because she was kind of intense. I kind of smiled and said, well, just humor me for a moment. I'm just gonna, see what happens here. And I'm not exaggerating, within 2 minutes, I had found this family that she could not find because she was so rigid in her thinking, and she was in tears, bless her heart. She was so happy that she actually brought us donuts the next day. And it's the only time that I recall, I guess a couple other times we've been brought food, but it almost never happens. But she brought donuts the next day. And there was a part of me thinking, really, if you just opened up your thinking a little bit, you would have had success on that. And then again, relying on what computers, what is a matching? What is a match? I mean, some of us remember the old Soundex code and what that is, but even then, the Soundex code wouldn't solve the fact that my great grandfather Merle Poffenberger is listed as Merle Taffenberger in the 1920 census. And his son Merle is a girl. My grandfather. So these things, they happen, right? So again, never trust spellings or indexes. The way you work around this is you use wildcards when you can. And you don't always know with the search. Now, with the major websites, typically you can use an asterisk and multiple asterisks. You can use wildcards. Try searches that are surname only or given name only or place only. I didn't put this example in here. I was looking for Robert Sheldon in Staffordshire in a census one time with a guest, and they could not find them. So I said, all right, well, give me all of the Roberts living in this parish in Staffordshire. And the guest looked at me like I was crazy, but sure enough, there was this Robert White who was about the right age. And when I clicked on the actual census entry, there was Robert Sheldon, whose father-in-law was on the line above him, who was like John or James White or something like that. And for whatever reason, the indexer put them down as Robert White instead of Robert Sheldon. And so a given name only search, or even if you're dealing with a specific sort of place only searches. Now, the reality is the searches you will do are free for the most part, right? So Amy has seen me do this a number of times where I get a little crazy because I like to cast a wide net, like a really wide net. I would rather have 1,000 results that I have to decide how to narrow that down than to have 2 results and wonder what I'm missing. I don't want to know what I've missed. I also sometimes just like to do searches for a surname in an area just to get an idea of how common that name is in that area. Then I know if I do find something interesting, how meaningful is it? Because I've just done a surname search and I have an idea of how common it is, right? And then always look at the original and do your searches in original records. The indexes really should just guide you to original records. And again, I'll show you some examples of why you want to do that. So forgive me for going off a little bit on some basic research principles. I just think that everything you do in the records that we're going to talk about, if you don't do them with some of these things in mind, then you could potentially struggle and miss something, right? Okay, so the primary record sets, the 3 C's I call them: civil registration, census, and church records. Whether we're talking for England, Ireland, or Scotland, right? These are the record sets that, that you have to know. So, so starting with civil registration. Civil registration is the British way of saying vital records, right? It's civil, meaning government, and registering, meaning births, marriages, and deaths. So it was the government's way of registering births, marriages, and deaths. And they don't use the term vital records. Okay. The government began registering births, marriages, and deaths in England in 1837, in Ireland in 1864, accepting Protestant marriages in 1845. Some Catholics can show up in there, but that's the basic idea. And Scotland in 1855. Now, I'm not going to read through each of these slides. They're in your handout. The one thing that I think you would notice is that the Scotland, what's contained in the information is longer, because the Scottish civil registration is awesome. So I guess if I were to highlight a couple things, and we'll look at a few records here in just a second. And in fact, if somebody has a Scottish family living in a particular place during this post-1855 time period, and you want to throw it in here, then that would be great. Throw it in the chat, and Amy will tell me what it is, and we'll play around with that. But in England, it's meaningful because you start picking up fathers, including mother's maiden name in 1837. The church records didn't do that. For marriages, I should say, or for births, and then marriages give father's name and occupation. So, you know, even if you have somebody whose first marriage was before 1837, it's always great to, if they have a second marriage afterwards, you can pick up a father sometimes that way. Death records are not like US death records, where you often get the names of parents and their birthplaces. They simply will give you name, date, place, age, cause of death, it should also say, forgive me there, and who the informant was, which can be a family member. But Scottish records will, just about everything, will ask for a ton of information. And Ireland records, remember, Ireland really belonged to, it's not properly put, belonged to England, but again, England's kind of the dominant country there. So their records were pretty similar to English ones. So I'm just going to go, we're going to do some live on the internet here, have a little bit of fun for just a moment. In part because I have to be a little bit careful showing actual records in some cases for English civil registration. So if I do something, if you want to know what one looks like, I'll do England birth certificate and images, and you can just find examples. I'll just choose this person's picture because I can tell it's a classic English birth certificate. Okay, let me see if I can get it to blow up. But it's on this official kind of paper right here, and it will have the date, the name of the child, male or female. This one actually doesn't have anything, and forgive me for it being small, but it doesn't have anything in the father's name field. So most likely an illegitimate child, which was fairly common, something for the mother's name. and then who the informant was. And so I'll show you an example of what an English marriage looks like when I show you the church records, because the form was the same. But that's in effect what it looks like. The place to find Irish civil registration is this website right here, irishgenealogy.ie. They have digitized their birth, marriage, and death records all the way up. For birth records, they have a 100-year privacy window, so to about 1919, 1920. For marriages, a 75-year privacy window, and for deaths, a 50-year privacy window. And so, so the way you go about looking for these records and finding, and this is, again, it's free, it's online, it's at this website. One that I'll use as an example is this, let's see, the surname is Bahan, and I want to show you a particular record. They were in Dublin, but I'll just say 1893. Again, I'm going to be casting a wide net in terms of place. We're just going to look at the Bahan marriages. I can click marriage, and it'll have you put in your name, or first, you're not a robot. Hopefully we won't get the click how many bicycles are in the picture, or whatever. Every once in a while you get that. But this is how this website works, right? And so the 23 Bahan marriages here, for example. So let me choose one here. Let's see, John Bahan and Margaret Halloran right here. So here it says where they are. 5th of November, 1893, I click on the image and it will bring up a marriage register. And here you can see this marriage record, right? So it looks very much like the English one. You have the names of the groom and the bride. It says they're of full age, meaning 21 years old or more. It has his occupation, their residences, and father's names and occupations. Their signatures, if they could sign. You can see that in this case, even in 1893, they did not sign. So probably were not able to. Every once in a while, I think people would not necessarily sign, and you get the names of witnesses down here as well. So classic sort of Irish marriage record right there. For Scotland, do we have any names that we can play around with?
Yeah, we've got Donald Campbell,
Okay.
who died in 1896 from Dumfriesshire.
Okay, awesome. So so you go to search our records, and then you do a people search. We're going to choose statutory registers because we're talking civil registration right now. And that's how they refer to them on the Scotland's People website. Now, this website is a pay-per-view website, but the index searches are free, right? And so, so it's Campbell. Remind me the given name, Amy.
Sorry, it was Donald.
Donald.
Campbell.
Oh, Donald. Okay, good Scottish name. Okay, and again, if there's a female named Donald, then I could, then bless their hearts. But I generally do not check the male-female box. It's kind of the boy named Sue mentality, right? And it was 1896, I think you said.
Correct.
So, okay, so here we can choose a county, and so we'll go to Dumfries, and whoever put that in, obviously I can't stop and make sure we have the exact right person, because really what I want to do is show a record here, and I'm clicking on Dumfries, and it seems to not want to show that to me. So again, this is real life. And we'll see if it will let me do that here in a sec. One thing I will say while I'm waiting for that to load is once you spend credits on something, it keeps a record of that. It keeps a record of that record, if you will. You don't have to spend credits looking at that record again necessarily. So, so that's one nice thing about the whole thing. I was reloading the page, so I think it bounced me back. Okay, I want you to know that this kind of stuff happens to everybody. Okay, so we'll go Donald. We'll take one more shot at it anyway. It's always worse typing when people are watching, admittedly. Okay, let's see. Dumfries. I think it's still kind of loading something here for whatever reason. It's a little slow on this one. Okay, I think it understands Dumfries. We'll see. But, okay, Donald's running out of time, I'm afraid. Okay, maybe we'll get it. All right. So it didn't like it. Now, this goes to my point about searching and being careful with your searches as well. And the reason why is because their default search options are exact names only. So you can choose all of these different ones. You need to be aware of these. These are these computer algorithms, though, right? That we don't always know what we're going to get out of it. Okay, so I'm just going to take some variables out so we won't have to worry about them as much. We may not get exactly the person that I'd love to demonstrate the exact record. What is interesting, though, in 1896, and it's Scotland, you would think that even in a little county like Dumfries, which is in the southwest along the English border, that you might have just a boatload of Campbells. And what I feel like I'm learning is there are Campbells around, but it's not necessarily the most common one. I'm glad, we're in deaths, perfect. So Scottish death records are the best. So I'm going to choose 81-year-old Barbara just for purposes of this example. And this is where you have to pay. So again, all the indexing searches, it's amazing how creative you can get. You can find a lot of people through the index, even though, like I said, you're not going to trust it, but you're going to get clues from it. And just by doing index searching before you pay. Now, when you do pay and you get a record, you can download this thing as a PDF, so you can have the document. I'm just going to keep it in the viewer for now. But this is incredible. 1896. You want to find the death record and the marriage record of every Scottish ancestor you possibly can, because this is Barbara Campbell. She was the widow of John Campbell, who was a laborer. She died the 14th of October, 1896 at 7 o'clock in the morning. Her residence was Glencurdle Cottage, right? She's 81 years old. It's I'd like to see another one just to feel great about it because of that little tail leading into the vertical stroke. But I believe it's actually 81, and it's just they didn't pick up the pen. Her parents, Andrew McCracken, who was a quarry laborer and is deceased, which you would expect, whether she's 81 or 87. And Jessie McCracken, maiden surname Harkness. And she died of asthenia. And James Campbell, the son, was the informant. And so, in 1855, when the registration started, they actually asked that 1 year, they asked additional questions. So even if you have like an ancestor born in 1857, but they have a sibling born in 55, you want to see that record because it'll tell you the names of the other children that were born, for example. But anyone you can find in a Scottish civil registration record, you definitely want to do that. So, so hopefully that's given you a little bit of insight, right, into what some of the civil registration records are, whether it's England, Ireland, or Scotland. Again, one other thing with England civil registration is, actually I should demonstrate as well, is that they have not digitized their birth, marriage, and death records. And so you still have to order them from the GRO website, gro.gov.uk. Now, recently, when I say recently, in the last maybe 3 years or so, they've added indexes to births and deaths. The index search is a little bit clunky, but having said that, if you have an English family that is during the civil registration time period, the birth index has mother's maiden name. Lots of times you can find children who were kind of lost in the middle. But essentially this is how you do your searching. You're limited to plus or minus 2 years. And so that's, again, you have your exact matching options. You have these different options, but you're really trusting the computer to let you know what's happening. You have to choose a sex of the child, which is a little bit unfortunate, I think. But having said that, with the mother's maiden name in there, you can do a search with your surname and with mother's maiden name only, and then just go through picking up, doing searches for male children, female children, and pick up families, and often find children that you didn't know existed because they died between census years. Another excellent website that I didn't put in your handout and should have, so if you're taking notes, freebmd.org.uk is a great website to index government registration of births, marriages, and deaths. Here you can limit it to counties or to districts as well. I find that the search algorithms are a little more forgiving if something is indexed differently or just written differently, or was hard to read, then this is another great place to look. Find somebody in here in the index, and then go back over to the GRO, General Register Office website, to then actually find the reference to the record, as well as if it's one that I want to order, I can order it from there. Also, the other nice thing they've added, so you do have to order, but for births and deaths anyway, they've added a PDF option. So those are less expensive. What are they, £7 now, I want to say. In about a week or so, you'll get a PDF email. You get an email with a link to the record, and so you can see the record that way. But unfortunately, when it comes to sort of the big 3 countries and these record sets, England is a bit behind Ireland, which has records for free. Scotland, which has indexes for free, but a kind of a pay-per-view for the actual records. England, it's a little bit slower. You still have to order. So hopefully that makes some sense. Let's talk census now. Censuses are pretty straightforward for all of the countries, since their forms were exactly the same. The biggest issue you have really is that with Ireland, the first fully surviving census is 1901. So they took named censuses earlier. The problem is the 41 and 51 censuses were destroyed in the Four Courts fire in 1922. 61 and 71, after they did their tabulating, they decided they didn't need them anymore, and so they destroyed them. 81 and 91 were pulped in the Great War, World War I. Of course, before they knew that the record office was going to blow up in 1922, they were pulped in about 1919. So that's a tough one for people, and we have to deal with census substitutes. But basically, the information you get is there. It's in your list. For England, you have indexes and images at the big 3 websites, which are Ancestry, FamilySearch, and FindMyPast, and I'll be showing you those in a bit. Ireland, they have an index and images at the National Archives.ie website. And then for Scotland, Scotland's a little more restrictive because they have Scotland's people. The images are at Scotland's people, but you have decent indexes at Ancestry. I like the one at FindMyPast if you have access to it, because it will show you a transcript of an entire family in one go, whereas Ancestry, you kind of have to click on each family member to get more details. but those are where you can go to access them, just to give you an idea of the kind of information that's contained. This is an 1851 census example from Boston and Lincolnshire. And the person who I found interesting here is Robert Roberts. And they're all living at Bargate. That's the residence. He's the head of the house. His condition is unmarried. He's 25 years old. His occupation is bookseller and printer. And his birthplace is, I can't remember. Right? And I wanted to say, well, of course he can't remember. I like to say we were all at our births. None of us were taking notes. None of us actually remember the event. And the thing, and this goes back to another thing to remember as you research, our birthplaces are secondhand information for us, right? Somebody has to tell us when and where we're born. And sometimes that gets taken for granted a little bit, because I've had a patron in the library say, no, they told me this is where they were born, and yet they can't find the record. And I wanted to say, well, okay, I don't doubt that they believed they were born there, but I don't think they were writing it down when they were born. You know, if a family moves when somebody's 6 months old, it's easy to make mistakes. Now, what makes this even more interesting, actually, is that at Ancestry, this one is indexed as they are born in Remember, Iceland. Remember, comma, Iceland. Somehow I can't has become Iceland for them. And I don't know why, but if you were looking for Robert Roberts and you were paying attention to birthplace and you wanted to find him in the 51 census, you could have some real issues searching, in this case, at Ancestry, because you might have an idea of where he should be born, but I'm guessing you're not going to think he was born in Remember, Iceland, as an example, right? And then the 1901 and 11 censuses were a little bit different in terms of asking for more information. This is the 1901 Ireland. This is a household return. So let me take a moment to talk about how the census was taken in the United Kingdom. What the census enumerators would do is they would take around a form called a household return, of which you have an example here. They would take them to each of the families for a given night. It was typically last weekend in March, first weekend in April. And they would ask the family to fill it out for that particular evening, who was under the roof. And then they would come around and collect the household returns, or if the family was not literate, they would fill the form out for them. And then they would take these returns and copy them into enumerators' books. Okay, another possibility for an error to take place, actually, are these copies. In the United Kingdom, from 1841 through 1891, all you have are the enumerators' books. They destroyed the household returns. Okay, in England, they continued that in England and Scotland until 1911. The first time you get a household return for England and Scotland is in 1911. For Ireland, you get them in 1901 and 1911. And this is what a household return looks like. And one cool thing at the very bottom, this James Lynch signs the form. So you know it wasn't an enumerator. So if this were your ancestor, you would have his handwriting and what he had put down in the form. And in particular on this form, he indicated that his 6-year-old son, William Lynch, and they were Catholic, his occupation was torments the house, for example. So you have a scholar above, the 8-year-old scholar, and you have the 1-year-old, the baby. But something that's fun about the household returns is sometimes you can see these personalities sort of coming out. I know of one fellow who enumerated his dog, and in the census as well, with their name and how many dogs they may or may not have sired, if you will. And a great entry. I doubt that would have made it, of course, into the enumerators book. So household returns are pretty awesome. But that's essentially what the censuses look like. Now, one last thing I probably should say, the 1841 census was the first census taken. They didn't want to, they were a little more conservative in the sense that they did take names, anyone who was over 15 years of age, they rounded that age down to the nearest 5. And so lots of people have ages that are 35 and 40 and 45 and 50, when in reality, if someone were 53 years old, they would have written 50. If they were 58 years old, they would have written 55, if you will, again, for anyone over the age of 15. And they don't ask for parish of birth, which is just a key piece of information. Of course, they only ask whether or not you were born in the county. Also, that census was written in pencil on blue paper, and that can make indexing to some degree a nightmare, where the copies are not very good. So there are things like that going on behind the scenes, and I'm going to drive the point home ad nauseum that you never trust an index or a spelling. All right, church records. There's a lot going on between the 3 countries. There are differences religiously, and so it's a little bit of a hard one to try and cover in a beginning class with so much variety. So I can only touch on the basics, but this table you'll have in the handout and in a little more detail. In England, as you know, Henry VIII couldn't get his divorce, so he became head of the English Church in 1534. And by 1537, they had passed an act requiring registers to be kept. So the earliest registers begin in 1538. However, a study that we have done as a British reference staff, we found that of the ancient parishes, meaning they were known to exist at the time of Henry VIII, 7.2% of English parishes existing had parish registers that survive to that date. And when you carry that forward to the year 1600, 54% have registers as of 1600. So the real risk, especially for people with New England ancestry and dealing with people who became disaffected with the Church of England and decided not to have their children baptized there, and who followed ministers over to New England in many cases, is to be looking at the records that you can see, the 54% potentially, and ignoring the ones that you can't see because they don't exist. And so just something you have to be very aware of. As far as non-Church of England people, other than Quakers who crop up in the mid to late 1600s, your non-conformist religions, meaning non-Church of England, as a general rule, start to exist more regularly from the 1780s on, so much so that they had to start they started civil registration, the government registration in 1837, because fewer and fewer people were attending the Church of England. And so in Ireland, on the other hand, their church records, you have 3 main religions. You have Roman Catholics, you have the Church of England, or Church of Ireland, which is the Church of England in Ireland. I kind of like to joke that if you call it the Church of Ireland, then it will become more Irish. But and then you have your Presbyterians, many of which were Scottish, who were given plantation land in northern Ireland and brought their Presbyterian religion with them. Regardless of the religion, Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, or Church of Ireland, registers start on average about 1820. It wasn't required for Presbyterians until 1819. There are some registers that exist prior to, but there are many that don't exist. For Catholics, when you take the modern version of the United Kingdom, which excludes the Republic, if you take the Republic of Ireland, roughly 90% of the Republic of Ireland was Catholic, based on the 1861 census that was destroyed after they counted. 90% were Catholic, and it was illegal to be Catholic until they started loosening the laws in the 1770s, 1780s, but they were the poorest group. They couldn't get churches built until, in many cases, until the 1820s. I know I would have loved, when I went to, on my last trip to Ireland, to have gone to Castle Jordan or Ballybolnabracky and found the parish church that my ancestor would have been baptized in, but it wasn't built until the 1870s, right? People were meeting at Mass Rocks. They were having their children educated in hedge schools. It wasn't until really the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829 that you could really freely be Catholic in Ireland. And so the records don't go earlier. There are other kinds of records you can use when dealing with a Catholic ancestor, hopefully, but it can be difficult for sure. In Scotland, on the other hand, the religion is Presbyterianism. The Church of Scotland, it has been a Presbyterian denomination since 1689. Those records tend to be freely available until 1854. You can find those on the Scotland's People website. We actually did a ton of microfilming there and created our own indexes, which are very good. The problem is because of Scotland's People and their pay-per-view, hopefully I won't offend anyone by saying, look, they're Scottish, and if they can find a way to make a buck, then they will. When the Family History Library is open, and when we have our family history centers, and I imagine there's one in Rochester that probably has limited hours, and it's closed right now because of COVID. But in the Family History Center, you could view images of these Scottish church records for free for the ones that we have. It is important to know, though, that in 1843, you have the Great Disruption, it's called, in which the Free Church of Scotland was created. And in many cases, whole congregations left the established Church of Scotland and became Free Church of Scotland people, or Free Presbyterians. And it's not unusual to see a family in the 1851 Scottish census, and you'll have children being born every few years, and you can find the children born before 1853 in parish registers. You have a hard time finding the ones from 1843 to the 51 census. The Free Church records are being more and more digitized and being made more freely available, not freely because Scotland's People will make you pay for them, but they are showing up on Scotland's People more and more. And note too that even before the Free Church, you had different branches of seceding Presbyterian churches. So the records or the information that are contained in them are somewhat similar. And this is a case where actually Scotland then falls behind. A burial wasn't necessarily a sacrament of the Church of Scotland. And so in many cases, very few burial records exist. Sometimes you'll even find mort cloth rentals, which would be kind of the rental of a burial shroud that would indicate somebody being buried, but you don't expect to find many burial records prior, burial records at all, but certainly prior to 1854. And similar situation for Ireland, where the Catholics didn't have burial grounds. They would be buried out in a field or a forest or something. The Church of Ireland did keep records on burials, and there would be a member of the family who would participate in the Church of Ireland, if not certainly like the oldest son, to take advantage of some things there. As far as access goes, for England, the big three, Ancestry, FamilySearch, FindMyPast, we've microfilmed for years. We started microfilming at FamilySearch in the 1940s, sorry, not 18, 1940s, 1950s. We ended up with 2.4 million rolls of microfilm, and then we started digitizing. And so we have a lot of records from all over the place, and a lot of them are indexed, but the indexes are not linked to the actual images. I'll show you what that means down the road here. You have Ancestry will make agreements like the London Metropolitan Archives. So Ancestry is great for London. FindMyPast, they digitize the Canterbury Cathedral archives. And so FindMyPast is great for Kent, for example. So it kind of just depends on, sometimes on the counties, which has the best coverage for those. For Catholic records, you have indexes at Ancestry and FindMyPast, but the images are at the National Library of Ireland, and it's different for Church of Ireland and Presbyterian. I have a couple places to start there. And for Scotland, again, I've talked a lot about how we have a great index and images, but you'll have to wait for a family history center to reopen to see the images. Otherwise, you pay at Scotland's People. Do the index search for free, pay for the image. I'm going to run through a couple examples of records just for fun in terms of what they contain. This one isn't classic, and this is, again, why you never trust an index, because the index itself would be up here for the baptism of Eleanor, the base-born daughter of Mary Boyer, baptized November 17th. Okay, this is in 1745. It's the kind of information you would expect. It doesn't, normally you wouldn't even necessarily expect the name of a father on an illegitimate child, but this one's a little funner because it has NB and it says this Mary Boyer, so the mother, right? This Mary Boyer is the widow of old Daniel Boyer, who married her for his son John to keep her company. For John could not have her for his wife because he was at that time married to another. She was to have been removed out of the parish, and John, to keep her with him, got his old father to marry her and had children by her both before and after his father's death, a thing scarce ever heard of before. So you get this brilliant story behind it, which actually teaches a lesson about illegitimacy and residency and removal. And so John's solution was to get his dad Daniel to marry his mistress to keep them in the parish. So again, you wouldn't find that in an index, so never trust like a transcript or whatever. A similar situation with a marriage record. These are English examples right now, by the way. This is the marriage of John Housden and Hannah Matthews. And in England, I talked about parish registers being as early as 1537. And in the 1590s, they required that an annual copy of the register be sent to the bishop of the diocese, and in some cases to the archdeacon. So you have a parish that in some cases belong to an archdeaconry, that belong to a diocese, that belong to the archdiocese of York or Canterbury. Now, you have these archdeacons transcripts in Kent, and this is a typical marriage in 1744. You have John Housden and Hannah Matthews of Faversham were married by license on June 6th. The classic kind of information you would expect from an English a church record marriage at this time. Now, they also made a copy and sent it to the bishop. So you have the bishop's transcript copy of this marriage. You have John Housden and Hannah Matthews, an old toothless widow. Both of Faversham were married by license. And so you get on June 6th, you get a little more information. Now, fewer than 10% married by license, I would say between 5 and 8%. Most people married by banns, which was a process of announcing the marriage for 3 consecutive weeks at the church. And if there wasn't an objection, then the couple would be married. It was much, much less expensive than marrying by license. And banns were also people married by banns in Ireland and in Scotland as well. And by the way, every time that I've said England, as far as the record goes, you should apply that to Wales as well. I should have mentioned that sooner. Okay, now having a fun archdeaconry, an archdeacon's transcript and bishop's transcript, let's have a look and see what the minister wrote in his own register, the actual parish register. In this case, he wrote, John Housden, widower, a young gape-mouthed lazy fellow, and Hannah Matthews, residence is Hottapont, an old toothless wriggling hag. Both of Faversham were trammeled, not married, mind you, but chained together like slaves is what it means to be trammeled. Were trammeled by license at the cathedral. And believe me, the Sea Salter Church is not a cathedral, but that was the minister's own joke. At the Cathedral of Sea Salter, June 6, 1744. Never trust an index and never rely on an index for your information, or you can miss out on something beautiful like that. Now, in England, this is a 1744 marriage, so thank goodness they hadn't passed Lord Hardwicke's Marriage Act yet. That was in 1753. So in 1754, they started using a form for marriages. This form from 1754 stayed in place until 1837. And this is one of my favorites. We have here, behold, an NB, which is Latin for note bene, a peculiar marriage. Daniel Broadbent was aged 23, Martha Cheatham aged 83. And this couple were also married by license. And as I told when I was teaching this, showing genealogy to some youth who thought genealogy was boring, I said, look, young men, you know, when you get into your 20s, don't limit yourself. The field is wide open. And of course, these Boy Scouts working on their genealogy merit badge had just a horrific looks on their faces at the thought of marrying an 80-year-old. But like I say, true love knows no bounds. And I know everyone out there is talking, oh, it had to do with money. And you're probably right, even if it wasn't very much. So, okay, let's look at a burial then really quick. I'm going to show you, of course, another interesting one. Normally you expect in a burial the name of the person and the date they were buried prior to 1813 in England. But this is a fun one as well, and a nasty one to read if you don't have some practice with it. This is from 1625, but here we have the burial of Richard Dawson, and then it adds he was brother to the above named John Dawson of Bradley. By the way, I'm pronouncing the ye as the because that's exactly how it should be pronounced. They would never say ye in England. Instead, the ye was what they called a thorn. It was a symbol with the pronunciation of the or the. In case you were wondering what I was doing, and they would use it in other places, or for the Y was the thorn. So in this case, Richard Dawson, being sick of the plague and perceiving he must die at that time, crawled out of his bed and made his grave, and caused his nephew John Dawson to cast straw into the grave, which was far from the house, and went and laid him down in the said grave, and caused clothes to be laid upon, and so departed out of this world. This he did because he was a strange man and heavier than his said nephew. So sadly, a few weeks later, his nephew was also buried of the plague, as it tended to just decimate families at the time, right? And so, but again, in some cases, you can get incredible information. Most of the time, you don't expect that. Now, for Irish church records, for Catholics anyway, I should show you that the National Library of Ireland, they have digitized their Catholic registers up into the 1880s. And so we'll go take a foray. I realize it's 8:04. Are we okay, Nancy?
Yeah, people
So
can leave if they'd like.
Okay.
I want to hang in. Yeah.
Hopefully it's sort of interesting for you.
Definitely.
All right. So but you can find
Hey,
these
Dan, really quick,
Yeah.
before, in case Nancy wants to leave early, she just wanted to know if McMegan and McMeekin are common Scottish surnames.
All right. So
in case she needs to jump off.
Yeah. So what I would do to find out, because the indexes are free and you would get a sense of it, is I would go to Scotland's People and I would do a parish register search. Or I'd go to FamilySearch into the Scottish databases, and I'll show you how you can get there if you can hang in there for just another moment. I'm almost done with this part of it. It was to go to resources, but I'll show you what I would do and how I would answer that, because it's a great question. So here they have their digitized registers at the National Library of Ireland, and it says it's not working, but the hamster wheel is turning, and there it is. There was a marriage I wanted to show you earlier, but didn't want to dwell on it too much. But the parish of Lucan in Dublin, this kind of gives you an idea of how it worked. That Behan marriage in 1893, I won't necessarily worry too much about it, but you can click on one of these here and it will bring up, and this is free, National Library of Ireland, this is free for Ireland. But what you can do, if I wanted to find the church copy of that civil marriage that was in irishgenealogy.ie, right, I could do something like this. go to 1893. And as I recall, the one I was looking for was in September, apply, and I won't get too stuck on it, but the images are here, and you can click on them. And one thing that's fascinating about these particular registers, I need to click on this little plus sign up here to make it bigger. But at this time in the Catholic Church, they're asking for parents' names, including mother's maiden name. So while the civil record only had the father's name and occupation, the Roman Catholic copy of the marriage is giving you both parents' names, including the mother's maiden name. So even if your ancestor came to America in the 1870s or something, if we know that one stuck around and would have married over there, you know, researching the family, it can certainly be helpful, especially in the case of Irish research. So hopefully that gives, that's just a little example. But if I had the Hans, rather than relying on an index at Ancestry or FindMyPast, and in fact, without even getting diving in too much, if I filter to something early, sometimes the registers, just reading them, you'll understand why I mean you should never trust an index. They're just, if you had to index it, you would be really disappointed. This one doesn't look super bad, so maybe this doesn't illustrate my point, but it is important to know that Catholic priests did not have a seminary in Ireland to study at, and I think it affected their scholarship and their writing sometimes, but this is in 1818, it looks like, and the writing's beautiful. So you get classic information here, the name of the child, the name of the parents, mother's maiden name, and then you get the sponsors or godparents, in this case, James Murray and Catherine Moore. So a very common Catholic baptism record for this time period. All right, so getting back, so talking about the primary, the big three. So we've talked about the big three record sets, the 3 C's. The primary sources, I won't spend a ton of time here other than a few searches to give you an idea of why, again, you should never trust an index. Ancestry.com, for example. Here's the way I like to approach any of the big three websites. I could do my search here in this search box. It's what I like to call the spray and pray. I don't know what it's searching. It's just searching all of Ancestry somehow. I don't know if it's searching church records, vital records, census records. I mean, maybe it's searching all of them. How well it's doing it, I don't have any idea. I don't like using that search at all. Instead, I like to come up to the top here, click on search, and I can choose all collections. Again, a little bit of a spray. It's like trying to search an entire file cabinet with one some sort of like X-ray vision or something, right? Instead, I like to do something like go to the card catalog. This starts to tell me what are the files that are inside the drawers in that big proverbial file cabinet, right? And so I can filter myself down into, if I go to Europe, specifically here in the filters on the left, and I can choose Ireland, I can choose the United Kingdom. So they have the Republic separate, and I can start to get into some of the record sets. It puts them up in some sort of weird order. If I want to look at big record sets, over here on the right, I can change it to record count. And then you start to see the really big ones like British phone books and civil registration indexes that we've talked about. The 1939 register, which is awesome. And some of the other large ones, right? Or if I have a London ancestor and I want to know specifically, I want to look at their Church of England records, I like to do this. I can type London and then Church of England. And since I know that they digitized at the London Metropolitan Archives, I can bring up these record sets, right, that they have for Church of England births and baptisms, 1813 to 1917, for example. So lots of great records here. And also learn that you might think you're searching Westminster when you're searching London, because Westminster is a little neighborhood really inside of the greater London area, but you're not. And so really, if you're in the London area, you can't ignore that Westminster has its own database. So pretty helpful there. One thing I'll show you with some of the names here really quick. I'm going to come back to search and then census and voter lists. And because I do a lot of UK stuff, the UK census collection here, and I'm just going to choose the 1851 England census. One example that I like to show people with the O and the Mac with Irish names, you have O and Mac, whatever. And if I do a search for just Hera, right? Not a lot of Heras, you'd expect a lot of O'Haras, right? Like Maureen, for example. But if I do a search for just Heras, I end up seeing how many people they had to correct their index on. That's what these little pencil marks are. And I can also see that William O. Hera, that might be his middle initial, but I wouldn't actually trust that it is. And as you go to the next page, you'll find several more where Joe is listed as a middle initial, or where the O, I'm sorry, is a middle initial rather than part of the surname. And so just little things like that. You can see the same thing with Mac. There are a lot of James M. whatevers, McMenamins or Mac whatever that that are actually their Mac, that's part of the surname and it hasn't been indexed properly. Another great example of this, I had the Iceland, the Remember Iceland one, but another great example that I sort of stumbled into while I was searching one day is the 1861 census. I could try it with 51 for fun, actually. But the 1861 England census, I stumbled into somebody who was born in Mexico. And I thought, I don't expect a lot of Mexicans living in England at the time, but that made me curious because good genealogists are curious. So I said, okay, how many Mexicans are living in England in the 1861 census? And I did my search. And I realized that according to this, there's over 1,100 Mexicans living in England, yet they're being born in places like Hendon, Mexico, and some of these have started to be corrected. Westminster, Mexico, Hoxton, Mexico, and if you look, if you understand these place names more properly, Middlesex, the county of Middlesex was being mistaken for the country of Mexico, right? So you might put in a birthplace because you know that's where they were born and completely eliminating finding your ancestor because there's some weird indexing issue that you're completely unaware of. You can see that with places all the time. So you should try a variety of searches, right? And so that's just an example, but going to Ancestry, going to search into the catalog is my preferred way of getting into specific collections using Ancestry so that I know what I'm searching. Okay, so FamilySearch, the next one. I can do the same thing with FamilySearch. I go to search and then to records. And we won't have quite as many things linked up, but I'm gonna use the Scottish example. So in just a sec, Amy, if you can remind me of the name. But over here on research by location, I can click on the British Isles little thing there. You have to be steady with the mouse a little bit, but I can choose England, Ireland, and Scotland. I mentioned that a lot of the Scottish church records that we microfilmed were indexed here as an example. So when I click on the Scottish records, I can then come down here to some of the major record sets. And a little odd to me that Ireland suddenly has popped up, and it just happened on March 18th. That's new. And I'm curious what those two records are, but I won't bore you with that. Instead, we'll go to, I'll go to the Scotland Marriages database, for example. And here again, I'm not searching that initial search screen that, as I call it, the spray and pray. I know I'm searching for Scotland marriages, at least specifically here. And what was one of the surnames, or the surnames that we were kind of comparing, Amy?
It was McMegan.
Okay.
Or
I'm terrified of that name
McMeekin.
and how it could be indexed. So McMegan,
Yeah.
and what was the other part of it?
McMeekin was
Meekin.
the
Okay,
second
so we
name.
have a CH and a G or GH thing, which phonetically that GH often has kind of a k sound, like lock in Ireland is spelled with a GH, for example. you have places names like Donaghmore with a GH, and it has kind of a cuss sound. So certainly that's something to worry about. But one thing we have in common, the vowels make me nervous a lot of the time. I'm going to use, just for the purposes of this example, I think we can have an H in there and an N, and I don't know what I'm going to get, right? But again, like I said early on, searches are free. If I get 20,000 results, then I can decide how I want to narrow them down, right? And I've been talking so long that I got bounced out, but I'll sign back in here, and hopefully it should just give me the search, right? And so I figured I was going to get a lot of McMahons, and I suppose in this case where we have McMachans, you know, we have to be careful phonetically. I can decide to throw the C and the G in there and maybe just test it most specifically using more precise terms than this, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to show you how you can use wildcards, in many cases multiple wildcards. At FamilySearch, you just have to have a letter. At Ancestry, to wildcard, you need to have at least three letters before it will let you wildcard. But you can choose an area. When I add that C in there, I'm getting 16 results for the entire country for a 10-year time period. And I'm also getting a sense, you know, Kirkcaldy is one of the counties I see listed, but Wigton seems to show up. Lanarkshire is where Glasgow is, and so it tends to pick up a lot of the different names anyway. And again, I could take this search and go with a G as well. And using this kind of a strategy, insisting on this combination, it didn't find any. And that always makes me a little bit nervous. So again, decide how you're going to play with your variables. I love to do this and try to understand what's going on with a name, right? And so, and then let me just illustrate quickly then FindMyPast and how you can do the same thing at FindMyPast. Again, a subscription site, but they have some very unique resources that are not on the other sites. So I don't know if on the Irondequoit library system, if this is one that is subscribed to necessarily, but
Sadly, not yet.
Okay, well, I'm not trying to sell it for you necessarily or make you, you know, I don't, but it does have, my favorite database here are the dog license registers for Ireland. I'm not saying it's always the most helpful, but if your ancestors in them, you can find out what kind of dog they had, which is kind of fun, and where they were living. And in Ireland, you should never take any record for granted, quite honestly. So, but here you would go to search, and then up to all record sets. And I have the list in your handout of how you would do it. I would filter on the side here, instead of using the world, I could filter it to Ireland, for example. You have Ireland petty session court registers with 23 million names in them, for example. And just, you know, if I wanted to, since I brought them up, I could type in the word dog, and you have the Ireland dog license registers with 7 million potential dog owners listed in here, and the actual records themselves. Maybe, you know, to more properly, I'll show you one since I brought it up, and so forgive me if I'm just taking so long, but there is a cool function that you have actually where it will, as you're typing in searches, it will start to give you an idea of how many results you get. I'm not going to search 15,000 results. I just want to grab a Patrick here and show you kind of what it looks like. So Patrick Colley from Tulla in County Clare over on the west coast, where the Cliffs of Moher are located. You have a Patrick Kelly. We'll see. Okay. Well, we won't worry about him because I don't want to spend the time. John McNamara here had a black greyhound. So there you go. And how much they paid. And it was a B, which I won't use the term, but I think that's a female dog in this case. Right. So let me just quickly go through some help resources and I won't be demonstrating a lot. Well, I'll demonstrate a little because I can't help myself. But There are incredible help resources out there. One of them is this England Maps project. I'll show it to you in a second. It's still on kind of this old beta platform, but for England, it's brilliant. Our FamilySearch Wiki has almost 100,000 articles. I kind of joke that before somebody retires at the Family History Library, we chain them to their desk and force them to put all of the knowledge that they're taking with them into the wiki before they leave. But there are also links to strategy sessions where you can sign up for a free 20-minute consultation with one of us staff or volunteers in the library. And I'll just show you that really quick. There's also the Help Center where a lot of our classes that we've done have been recorded, so you can search topics. Also, FamilySearch Community, it's a great way to ask questions, and especially if you're dealing with ancestors and other areas of the world where you don't know the language, you can get translation help. I have a neighbor lady down the street who has Lithuanian ancestors. I know very little about Lithuanian research, but I asked a colleague of mine who knows Russian to just show me what the surname looked like. I taught her how to see the surname and digitize records. And then she just started finding that surname and cropping the record out and posting it into the community. And people who do know Russian were transcribing it for her. And it's a great resource that a lot of people don't know about. So just quickly on the website, maybe the best way to get there, if you go to search and then to research wiki, here you can look up anything. So if I look up like England, or if I have Warwickshire ancestors, right, then I can go Warwickshire and genealogy. I expect it would pop up, but if I have Warwickshire ancestors, it will take me to the Warwickshire page and lots of potential record sets. If I'm looking for probate records, I can find resources there. There's a separate parish page for each parish in England. And so I can go and find records relating or links to records elsewhere relating to that. The other thing I can do in the wiki is I can say, I can type up here, strategy session. And this is how we are going to be doing business a lot of ways going forward at the Family History Library because of COVID. And the first search under strategy session, or the first result is virtual research strategy session. I can come down here and book one and if it's an Irish, I get a lot of Irish consultations, for example. I can choose Europe. And I can come down and choose Ireland, and we're doing these for free. They're strategy sessions. They're not so we can do research for you by any means, but we'll give you some ideas of where to take your search. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that help. And as well up here, when you click on this help button in the top right, you can see where there's the Help Center. That will take you to classes that we've recorded. Community, I mentioned. We have colleagues, and I probably should do a little more, but go on and we answer questions in community. It's over here on the side under research groups. So if you don't want to talk face-to-face about your research problem, you can go in here. And the groups that I look at specifically, as you see, they're British in nature. And so the Ireland Genealogy Research Group, for example, and pose questions that way. So there are lots of help resources that that people don't necessarily know are out there that you can use. And a lot of you may not ever make it to the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, but we're making it so you can have access to a lot of the help and records that we have. And then just the England Maps project here. It's the URL, the address is in your thing. It's familysearch.org/MAPP. You can't get to it by going through just the regular FamilySearch page. But one of my favorite little parishes over in Essex is a parish called Goldhanger. If you had ancestors there, you could type in Goldhanger. It shows where it is. You have this map of England, and this only applies to England. It was like a 7-year project, but it tells me that the original registers go to 1558. It tells me primary jurisdictions that might be important for civil registration, for example. and those kinds of things. So it can be a great resource. And I can even say, okay, I have somebody born in Goldhanger, but they wouldn't have registered the birth there. And so I want to know what civil registration district would that show up in. So I can use this little drop-down menu up here and say civil registration district and see that for all of the people living in these several parishes here on the east coast of Essex, they would have registered their births, marriages, and deaths in the Malden registration district. And so when I'm looking for those registrations, I'm not looking for Goldhanger or Woodham, Walter, or Langford. I'm looking for Malden because that's how it was registered. So again, some great help resources. The very last slide that I have is don't forget about Genuki. It's a locally done project. It stands for Genealogy UK and Ireland. And again, just incredible resources here. Similar to our FamilySearch wiki, but I like some of the detail here. And so you can go to Ireland parishes as well. It goes to the other parishes. But if I were to say Goldhanger again, just to save some time, you can do some comparing. And it'll pop up in a number of different ways, even in other different entries. But here's its parish page. It shows an outline of the parish as well, along with some sense of records and what's happening in the churches and so forth. So great help resources there. Forgive me for going almost an hour and a half. I hope you have found this useful, even if you're an experienced UK genealogist, and I'm happy to stay on and take questions.
Dan, that was amazing. I mean, we still have 50 people hanging in with you. So
Thank you.
yeah, this was unbelievable. Lots of information.
Yeah, it's hard to limit it. So forgive me there too.
No, that's wonderful. Is there anybody that has questions at this point, or maybe?
Okay, just going through the chat. Thank you. Thanks to all of you who are so kind. I'd be happy to do it again sometime if there was a more specific topic or something that we wanted to address. But yeah, otherwise too, again, don't hesitate to sign up for consultations or use the community to get some resources that way. And so to help that way.
Well, and to say, I think your point on the, going wide with the names is so helpful. I'm a librarian and I search for a living, but I've been doing genealogy for years and searching the Palmater name, and just happened to run across, it's misspelled a lot, Palm with an E or an I. But then I found all these records that were transcribed incorrectly under Palmester, and so I ended up searching. The person, he had a rather unique first name, Orlando, and by the area, and came up with all these census records I had never found before that had key bits of information, because I was always hung up on the correct spelling. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's great. I find that vowels seem to be indexed or just more likely to be wrong. Like when I was showing that McMeekin search or whatever, you saw my first inclination was to take the vowels out. But really boiling it down to the least likely possible mistakes, if there's a way to think of it right. I mean, you don't expect people to make a mistake on the given name of John. I suppose it happens, but Orlando would be a fascinating one to see. At FamilySearch, you could just start, okay, give me all the given names that start with O, because that's a pretty recognizable letter. So O asterisk, and kind of see where that takes you. Like I say, you could, in a county, you could search for all the given name O's in England or Scotland or wherever they were at, right? And see what happens, because again, they're free. If you get 2,000 results, you can decide how you want to whittle it down. It's certainly not like the old days when I would sit at an old microfilm reader and go page by page by page by page. And because information is so readily available, it's a little bit easy to get impatient or sort of locked in. But thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Karen, for bringing that up. Yeah, that's valuable, I think.
I think somebody asked a question about what about immigration records from Ireland to Canada?
Ah, yes. Yeah, and I know there was one that came in early, and I meant to think about it, but you know, you get going. I have at FamilySearch at the Roots Tech, I have some classes that talk about it because of the short answer is this. The Ireland was part of the British Empire, and they did not see a need to record outbound lists until 1890. I'm guessing that's way too late for you. Most of us have famine immigrants, as I do, for example. So we rely heavily on the inbound lists into the United States or into Canada. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for the United States, they begin inbound lists in 1820. Unfortunately for Canada, the records, the earliest port that shows anything is into Montreal or Quebec City. I forget which one, but it's 1865. And then you have St. John's, Newfoundland, where I think they begin in the 1880s. But if you go to the National Archives and Library website for Canada, you can find some useful resources. I think there was an Ulster Scots or a Scots-Irish question as well. Or the, I know what it was the Highland, right? It was the Highland clearances. There are some sources on the Canadian side that talk about it in terms of actually researching an ancestor in Scotland, especially in the Western Isles of Scotland and in the north. The registers, I mentioned the Church of Scotland becoming the established church in 1689. Most of those Church of Scotland registers in the islands often don't begin until the 1820s, if you're lucky. So you can find things that talk about them. If I can share my screen one more time here, for those of you who don't mind sticking around, I'll show a couple other things that I had kind of pulled up. I know there was a question relating to that. So I did have now that I have a million tabs going, let's see, this is National Records of Scotland. I had the Canadian one pulled up and maybe I've lost it. The National Records of Scotland, I just did a search for clearances in their records, for example. This is their name for the National Archives. It's the National Records. And there's some things that just a few things that actually brought it up. But I know, here's the Canadian one, of course, the Maple Leaf. I don't know how I missed that. But here you also have some information on the clearances. There's an
Hey,
immigration.
Dan, we can't see your screen.
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
We can't
I said
see your
start to
screen.
share and then I didn't finish the process. So now can you see it, I hope?
Yep.
Okay, my bad. Thank you for saying that. There's some published sources that are talking about the Highland immigration to British North America. It's earlier than I think they were looking for. There was also a question I think somebody had beforehand that had to do with sources for the Irish in British records. So when you had the Public Record Office destroyed on June 30th, 1922, there was an effort to try and gather Irish records regardless of where they were. Keep in mind that Ireland being controlled by the English for so long, you had many English landlords. My Connells, the landlord for the estate or the area in which they did their tenant farming was the Marquis of Lansdowne, who had a place in London and also out called Bowood House out in Wiltshire near Bath, England. And the estate records are there. Good luck looking at them, but I'll save that story for another day. In the process, though, what they did is there was a Hayes who started gathering information from all over the place. And that has ended up at the National Library website in their sources catalog. So if you go to sources.nli.ie, And just because it was kind of personal to me, I put in Lansdowne, and because it was like I say, the Marquis or Marquis, however you want to say it, of Lansdowne, and a number of different papers that are connected. But just to show you on the side, these records here are coming from the British Museum, as well as the National Library and other archives around. The House of Lords Record Office has some, for example. If not there, then going to the National Archives. I just typed in Irish collections. But the great thing about the National Archives website for the UK is they are the record repository for the British Empire. And you can find tons of things here. And similarly, just typing this Irish collections in and National Archives gives me 773 results, but over 9,000 results for other archives, because they've done a great job of getting archives from other areas and their catalogs into their catalog. I was looking for a manor court record in Essex for a family that owned land. I went to the National Archives website here and found out that the manor court roll for the year 1750 for the area in Essex I was looking for was actually being held at the Hertfordshire Archives or Record Office. And so I took a trip over to Hartford to go look at that document. And so to answer that question, these are a couple of sources that I would use. I was going to show one more thing if I could. I haven't talked at all about the John Grenham website. For those of you with Irish research, I kind of thought, Amy, when you brought up that surname of McMeekin or something to that effect, and I'll just throw up some variant that I think will get me in the ballpark. To have this nice sort of surname search there, knowing that you have your Scots Irish, and nope, I totally got I got shut down on it. So maybe I'll do something a little different. Anyone have a surname they can throw out really fast? I'll do it for you.
McAuliffe.
Okay, McAuliffe. So something like the poor teacher who died in the shuttle accident, something like that. Maybe?
Yes, same spelling.
Okay, so never trust a spelling. Oh, wait, I went second surname there, so that's not going to work. Let me back up and I'll type it in here, right? But the nice thing about Grenham is, and it should work for Scotland in terms of surname variants in a way, but notice how when I type in the surname in Ireland, I get a distinct pattern based on the Griffiths valuation. There was a tax that was assessed over a period of time mostly in the 1850s. But I can see over here to the side of known variants that John Grenham has identified in different spellings. And I would take them seriously because, again, our ancestors aren't writing their name in the record, and our people aren't indexing those names from the record. So notice, I'll just let you enjoy the list on the McAuliffes. It's a pretty healthy list. You get a little bit of surname history here. The helpful thing, though, that Grenham does offer, like if we knew a McAuliffe married do we have another surname?
Clancy.
A Clancy, right? So it's kind of fun because he'll identify areas where both surnames can be found. And so down here we have all of the government or civil parishes. It's kind of a discussion for another day, but all of the civil parishes, it looks like predominantly in County Cork, a little bit in counties Limerick and Tipperary, but you can see the layout here. But if you knew you had those two and you had an immigrant, but you didn't know where they were from in Ireland, you could use sort of this surname distribution strategy to give you ideas of where to begin looking, for example.
How do you spell Grenham in this site?
So this is John Grenham, Grenham. It's free to a point. I have a subscription. I haven't logged in for a long time. Every once in a while, it'll say you need to log in, and there's like this annual fee of $60 or $70. But I find if I don't use it very often, you can get away with 5 or 6 or 7 searches, or like it's every few days. In the library, there's no such thing as an institutional subscription, for example. So the you know, the Iron Library couldn't, or the Iran Dacoit, sorry, system couldn't have an institutional subscription to it. But so in the library, we would kind of use it. And if it said we needed to pay, we would just move to another computer and start searching some more. It's just unique. But John Grenham himself, I've met him a few times, a very nice man, and really the recognized authority on Irish genealogy in Ireland. So. There you go. See, I can start riffing on all kinds of stuff if somebody comes up with a question, I'm afraid. So.
I have a name, it's McGookin.
Okay, yeah, it's probably
McGookin, but I I ran into a lot of different spellings.
yeah, absolutely. So I think you would probably run into the same kind of a thing, and it's fun to do. If you feel like hanging around, and Amy, you don't have to stick around forever on this, but I love having Amy along. She puts up with all my stuff. I could talk about this.
I just have a school meeting in about 20 minutes, so I might have to go.
No, we'll just, thank you so much for your help, though, if you slip away before.
Amy, thank you.
But I'm gonna share, and I want to take this one more step because this is just always fun for me. Oh, sorry, I only did the first half of sharing now. Can you see it now?
Let's see your email.
Oh, not okay, I didn't share the right thing. Okay, be patient with me. I know it's later for all of you, so I can't use at some point I'll probably, start making mistakes as I get tired, but all right, so now can we see the screen?
John Grenham, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So it was McGookin like this, I believe, is what you said. Right, very specific, which is fascinating. It's kind of makes it more interesting. You can see a variety of spelling options, as you mentioned, as you would have, right, and where they're located. But if you have Irish ancestors, I want to show you another place and another website. And some of you, I know, because I've done this for a long time, that when I bring up the valuation and I say it was mostly in the 1850s, there are going to be some of you saying, well, wait, no, my ancestor left in the famine in 1847, so this is meaningless to me. That could not be further from the truth. It just could not be further. You can't think of Irish research the way you think of other places. So you have to consider that not everybody in your family left, and we need the evidence of the people who stayed behind to help us solve the problems that are earlier than the Griffiths valuation in the 1850s. As an example, one of my favorite place to search Griffiths valuation, and I wonder where the link takes you, or just gives you that. Okay, is a website called Ask About Ireland. Now, I wish I would have mentioned this sooner, but if you end up sending out another email, part of the handouts included these maps that we use for guests in the library. The map of Ireland has the Grenham website on the back. It has the Ask About Ireland website that I'm showing you here listed on the back. There are more websites listed on those other handouts that Nancy would have shared with you as well, that we just could not cover in the time that we have. But at Ask About Ireland, you have the Griffiths valuation here. And I'm going to use, well, no, I won't. I can tell you the story about my wife's people who came from just outside of Newry in County Down. But I'm going to use McGookin if the person who had the McGookin name, if you're still there, because I'm not sure that there are a lot of them. In fact, there are 21 entries. That's not 21 individuals, but in the valuation, you have the occupier and you have a landlord. When the occupier is a McGookin here, then you know they're not necessarily the landlord. Here we have a John Kavanagh, and it's not a McGookin name. And so a McGookin is probably the landlord. But we'll pick, if there's a given name really quick that's interesting, let me know, or I'll just click on one. Nope. All right. I'm going to go for Daniel because Daniel is an awesome name. And they're in Carrickfergus, and I'm being self-deprecating humor because my name's Daniel. I'd like to say it's, Danny Boy and it's very Irish, but I'm actually born in San Diego and named after a Mexican kid named Danny de la Isla, which I'm still proud of, but it's not an Irish thing. So the valuation, I can tell from here that that this Daniel McGuckin, the primary next person up, or the immediate lessor is the term they use, is an Ellen Kirk. Don't know if she's important, but it ultimately could be something to lead me to estate records. The valuation was printed in 1861, so most likely it took place around 1859 or 60. The Townland name is Middle Division, and I don't like that Townland name because what I want to show you is going to be really cool. So I'm actually going to back out and choose a different McGuckin. We'll go for Jane here in Ballynure because it's a little more rural than Carrickfergus. At least that was my impression, but it is near Belfast. So we'll use it though. It's in a great townland called Dunturkey, which just sounds funny to me. But no, we don't have a map reference number. So forgive me. I'm going to go, but this is really our best surname to use. So, but they're in a very specific area. So whoever's researching it, man, I would, I feel like I could dive into it pretty easily and get a sense of what's happening with the name as a whole. So, so having said that, maybe what I'll do is choose something that I know I can give you a great example on. And that's my wife's people of Hazley, because I actually use this on the ground in Ireland on my little phone to get to the exact place where this Thomas was living, because I know that my wife's third great grandmother said that she was born in a place that they all thought was Lavelmore or Lavelmore, but it turns out it was Savilmore is how they pronounce it there. And Savilmore Townland and map reference number 2. And the Glennies are a family that are still around that area. And what I did is, knowing that it was map reference number 2 for Savilmore, I came out here to the right to the map view and clicked on the icon. And it'll take a second if it's really small on your screen probably, but it'll say preparing your map in the upper left corner there. And it just takes a moment, but it works 90% of the time. Irish are very tied to the land, and they know their townlands incredibly well. There's over 64,000 townlands in Ireland, and they know them. And this was another point that sort of drove it home. So here we have this ordnance survey map from the 19th century in most cases. Because it showed me 2 rectangles here, if I didn't know better, I would have every reason to believe that Savilmore was kind of along this southern edge, or it wouldn't show me the 2, right? But as I zoom in, every one of the thick lines here is a townland, and so what I'm looking for is this. This is Ballyholland. You can kind of see it written through there. And then every one of these other little things is a piece of property. And as I recall, actually, it's been a little bit, there's Creve. It just seemed like it was kind of on this edge here. So forgive me for not being, there's the town of Newry. It's gotta be up, so ignore my other idea, because it's up here northeast. So I won't spend a lot of time making sure I necessarily grab it, but there's a Savile Beg. Okay, I know right where we are now. So beg meaning less, right? So so Savilmore has a little border of it that goes. So here's Savile Beg on the right here on the left, and Savilmore Townland is right here on the right. Now, he's property number 2, which was right down in this corner. And as I zoom in, you can see property number 2 listed 2A right there. And And you can even see that they're just down the road. There's this little corner, this little triangle that's part of Savile Beg Townland. Well, I was there, and I clicked on satellite up here in the upper left. And what it will do is take this map and impose it on a modern satellite image. So I click on satellite, then I go to the slider in the upper right corner here, that between modern map and historical map. And as I slide it to the left about 2/3 of the way, you can start to see the townland on a modern satellite image. And it's amazing considering the technologies involved. This red line is following a line here underneath, but these hedges and rock walls in different areas, but primarily here, hedges are still in the same area. And the image is off just slightly, but not much. So Savilmore Townland, or this property number 2 right here, having been on Coal Pit Road, it follows Coal Pit Road. And I've been to this house, or to these houses, and walked to the backyard. And what was fascinating is they remember their dad talking about the Hazleys. And she said she remembered, you can see this from the old map, where the home was. The way she described the home was, looking at the satellite part of the image, was just right over in here, but remembers playing on the foundation of the old Hazley home, and in fact transplanting a bush that was in front of the home into the backyard. So I actually have a tiny branch from that bush of a plant that was planted by my wife's great grandparents there. And but you could still see the land. And she even pointed out, well, no, as soon as you get across the street there's a small section that's Savile Beg Townland. Like, she knew very specifically where it was. But if you can, figure these things out with your Irish ancestors, you can absolutely drive down the road and be in the area where your ancestor was doing their tenant farming in most cases. And I know that because I've done it. So kind of a cool thing that you can take beyond just John Grenham's surname search and the way you can use the valuation there. So anyway, sorry. I love showing people that because it's, it's meaningful and hopefully helpful to those of you with Irish ancestors in some way as well.
Well, Dan, yeah, like somebody in the chat said, wish we could stay on here forever. I actually have a dog also that is waiting to go outside.
See, sorry, no, I know. Hopefully
So
people take potty breaks and stuff, but
yeah, I'm gonna have to end this for the evening, but thank you so very much. This was wonderful, and we would love to have you come back and present for us again. I can speak for everybody here, so
yeah, thank you.
thank you very much. And to everybody that's still on, this is being recorded, so it will be up on our YouTube channel, but I'll also send you a link to that when we get that up and running. And you should all have the handouts that Dan referred to. I did send those to your email earlier today. So thank you again. It was wonderful to have you and learn so much from you. And hope everybody has a great night. And I will also probably send the chat too, if I can figure out how to save that one. So, because there's good information in there.
Yeah, don't leave the chat though. I know that as soon as you leave, it seems to go. Having done a lot of Zoom, but
I will save that chat right now.
But all right, thanks all of you.
All right,
best
so
wishes
much.
in your search and everything. So, okay.
Thank you.
Bye.